Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Gold Standard with Alan Mosley, and here's your host, Alan Mosley.
Thank you so much, Blake.
Hey, you're welcome.
You know, I should
Good to see you
introduce
again.
I should introduce you before me this time.
Why?
After last week's debacle, where I said nobody cares.
Yeah,
So
nobody
this is the producer of the Gold Standard, for which none of this is possible without Blake Osborne right here.
Yeah,
I am your host, Alan Mosley. What is this, episode 13?
13.
This is unlucky. Sorry, Mike. This
There-
is unlucky episode 13. But we have an awesome guest this week. We have Michael Maharrey, who is the National Communications Director of the 10th Amendment Center, who hails from the home of the Principles of 98, which is, for insider baseball folks, that is the state of Kentucky. So you're right north of us. We're in Tennessee. The author of many articles and 3 books, and we'll talk about all those as we go along. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. You know what they say about Kentucky and Tennessee, don't you?
What's that?
What?
Kentucky's always on top.
Oh, boo. Well, wait, hold on. Where did the Wildcats finish in basketball this year compared to UT? We're not going to talk about the SEC tournament. Everything else.
Right? Well, can we talk about the NCAA tournament?
No, we're not going to talk about that either.
So we're only going to talk about the things that have benefit. You guys would be good Republicans.
We're gonna talk about total head-to-head, and we're going to talk about final ranking in the AP.
Well, here's the ugly little secret. I'm not a Kentucky fan, so
Okay.
I don't really care.
Okay. Well,
I'm a Florida fan, and I don't really follow basketball all that much.
I'm a Florida guy
I
myself.
think you guys would love that.
I hope everybody around you gives you a hard time for being a Gator.
No.
Not around here. They don't. Not in football.
Well,
people in Kentucky, you can't say anything about football at all. So most of them don't even know it exists.
well, in these parts, we talked about football for like 80 years, but we don't talk about football anymore. But yeah,
I feel you.
Yeah.
So anyway, getting on to more. Well, I was going to say more fun subjects, but I don't know how much more fun it's going to get than that.
No.
Yeah, shaking your head no.
We might as well be done.
Yeah, we're done. Yeah, well, this was a good show.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. So we're really happy to have you. I've followed the 10th Amendment Center and Michael Bolden, and I've listened to I've watched a bajillion videos and read your articles and interviews on things like the Tom Woods Show and. I'll tell you up front going into this interview, we don't talk about the Constitution a ton on this show, and the main reason being is because we're those dirty anarchists like we are, or at least like I am. And so,
Well, here's the really, really dirty little secret. I'm an anarchist constitutionalist. So.
Yeah, ooh.
But let people try to wrap their brains around that, figure that out.
Well, the only reason, you know how it is that the only reason I even mentioned that is that, we are the first people to poke fun at like the libertarian community on this show. And we do that because for one, if you can't poke fun at yourself, then what can you do? And two is that we make fun of all the time that there's only like 17 libertarians on earth, and they're all broken into like 12 different camps because everybody's arguing about who's a real libertarian. So we're definitely not going to hold it against you if you're a libertarian constitutionalist, because I mean you gotta find places to fight battles, right?
Well, exactly, and that's really what it comes down for me. I am an anarchist from a philosophical standpoint, and I actually have a page called Godarchy that's completely dedicated to a Christian anarchist, anarcho-capitalist view. But we live in a system that exists as it is. And we have this thing called the Constitution, and it would arguably, if we actually abided by it, it would certainly be much more limited government system than what we have now. And it provides a tool to push back against overreach, to push back against government. And I think there's some good principles that we can talk about, especially when we talk about nullification, that it lays the foundation for a broader principle. And I say this all the time. Constitutionalism is kind of a what do they call it? The gateway drug to real liberty. And I'm a prime example. I was a raging neocon, 5 or 6 years ago, and through getting involved in the 10th Amendment Center and being exposed to people like Tom Woods and starting to do a lot of reading and stuff, my political views have evolved into a much more libertarian place. And I think that's happened for a lot of people. So, we're all on a pathway, and we have to use the tools that are available to us. And we have the Constitution. We might as well use it. If they're going to claim that that's what we're living under, then we should actually live under it.
Well, yeah, I mean that's perfectly said. I think that's a perfect segue for getting into the 10th Amendment Center itself. I'm going to pull up the 10th Amendment Center website here, which is 10thamendmentcenter.com, which is an excellent website. Everybody needs to go check it out. It's 10thamendmentcenter.com. So, I always like to assume that our audience of 12 people who have never watched the show before until today. So give us a little bit of an introduction on what is the 10th Amendment Center and how are they fighting the battle for liberty.
So the 10th Amendment Center was actually founded back in 2006. So we've been around for a little more than a decade now. And from a practical standpoint, we do two different things. But let me lay down the philosophical kind of idea first. Mm-hmm. This is how we kind of describe everything we do. Follow the Constitution, every issue, every time, no exceptions, no excuses. So that's kind of what we do at the 10th Amendment Center. We're strict constitutionalists. Like I said, if you're going to have this contract, if you're going to have this system of government, then the government should follow it. And so we basically do two different things from a practical standpoint. In the first place, we do education. So we teach about the Constitution. We teach constitutional history. We teach about what the founding generation said and believed. We talk about what was promised when this document was ratified. And then we also have a large segment of our work involves activism, and that essentially involves using state and local power to confront and limit federal authority. And really, it's from a philosophical standpoint, we're all about decentralization. And I firmly believe that centralizing power is the biggest threat to liberty. I think the more that you concentrate power, the more that it's monopolized, the bigger danger there is to actual liberty. So if we're going to have governments, then we're much better off having most of the power at the state or local level rather than having this behemoth in Washington, D.C. imposing one-size-fits-all regulations on 350 million people. So we use this idea of nullification, the idea that states have the power and authority to effectively render federal actions null, void, or simply ineffective within the borders of a state. And we use this as a way to limit federal power. And interestingly, that was exactly what James Madison, who many people call the father of the Constitution, that was actually what he recommended in Federalist 46 before the Constitution was even ratified. He said that if the federal government commits an unwarrantable act, or even a warrantable act that happens to be unpopular, the states have this power at their hand, and that power is a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. So basically what we're doing is we're telling states they should look at the federal government when it says you're going to do this, that, or the other thing, and just say no. It's like every 3-year-old can do. You say no, and you nullify that act, and you limit federal power, and you devolve political authority down to more local levels. So, that's kind of the nutshell of what we're doing over at the TAC.
Well, that's really interesting because I think, we here in this conversation, if we are, there's a little twinkle in our eye when we hear words like ratifying debates or ratifying conventions and principles of 98 and that sort of thing. But I think it's pretty safe to say that for the average student of the public school system who's coming out today, all of that is totally alien.
Absolutely.
If they go to the 10th Amendment Center website and they read about any of the philosophy behind where these arguments are coming from, it's just whoosh, it's over the head. How do you begin to approach people who if they're a completely blank slate and they're coming to you and they're saying, well, I'm just unhappy, harumph, we're unhappy. I don't like the state of the world. What can I do? Because being mad and yelling at the ceiling only gets you so far. So if I want to do something, where do I get started? Where do you start with the education factor and then where people can direct their frustrations?
Really what we do at this point is we really focus on I guess more of an issue-oriented approach, and that's kind of the foot in the door. So, you get somebody that's upset about federal gun control. You get a lot of people on the right, and they don't like federal gun control. And so they look at what happens in Congress, they look at what happens in the Supreme Court, and they're banging their head against this wall trying to get things done at the federal level. And the first thing we tell them is, hey, quit calling the 202 area code. Quit trying to get everything done through Washington, D.C., because quite frankly, they don't give a crap about you, and anybody that's ever tried to do politics, and you always start at the federal level, anybody that's ever called Congress realizes this is true from the moment that phone call starts. You talk to this intern who has absolutely no interest in hearing what you have to say, and they'll write something down, and if they agree with you, they'll give you some platitudes, and if they disagree with you, they'll get you off the phone as quick as possible. And then about 2 weeks later, you'll get an email from that congressman that has absolutely nothing to do with the phone call. Mm-hmm. And so it's pointless. It's like banging your head against the wall. Now, the difference is you can actually get some stuff done at the state and local level. Those people, I mean, it's not ideal, obviously, but they pay a lot more attention to you than the folks at Congress do. So we say, hey, quit banging your head and doing the same thing over and over again. Quit trying to vote the bums out. Quit trying to petition Congress. Quit depending on federal courts, and go do something at your state level. And so for the instance of guns, what we say is, look, the federal government wants to impose gun control. It wants to ban assault rifles, let's say. Well, in order for them to do that, they're going to need the cooperation of state and local governments. There's not enough ATF agents in existence to actually enforce any kind of gun ban. So they're going to depend on police departments and sheriffs and all those folks. Well, here's what you do. At your state level, you get your state to ban the use of state and local resources to enforce federal gun control. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, you effectively take the enforcement mechanism away from the federal government, and you can make that gun control unenforceable. And people say, oh, that's not going to work. Well, absolutely it's going to work. It's been working with marijuana. And that's the exact model. I mean, marijuana, weed, that is the model that everybody should follow if they want to do something on an issue-by-issue basis. States began in 1996 legalizing medical marijuana, starting with California, and the federal government cracked down. The federal government said, you can't do this, and we had a Supreme Court case, and the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do this, and states did it anyway. So now today we have 29 states with medical marijuana legalized. We have, I think, 9 states now that have legalized recreational marijuana. There's no way for the federal government to impose its prohibition without state and local cooperation. So we take that model and we try to apply it to any issue that we can imagine, from guns to, healthcare, EPA regulations, you name it. You can apply this refusal to cooperate to these different issues. As you get people involved in the issues, you teach the principles along the way.
So I think you've already answered my next question pretty well. Is that so really the kind of bread and butter of the 10th Amendment Center fight is just the idea that, well, if we just decide to peaceful non-cooperation with whatever federal edict is coming down the pipe, that the monolithic government that be it's just simply not a tenable position for them to have agents on every corner of every block of all 50 states and telling you all, I'm sorry, I'm the enforcement officer. That just doesn't, it's just not financially or population wise tenable. So you're going to work with the wiggle room you got, I guess is what you're saying.
Exactly, and I like the way you put it, and I put it this way often. It is essentially civil disobedience, but using a government entity to implement that civil disobedience. And it's just like, driving on the highway. Nobody drives the speed limit, And of course, the federal government is like the state police trying to enforce the speed limit on whatever interstate happens to be, I-40. They're outside of Nashville. There's no way they can do it. Now, they can pull over some people and they can create a problem, and the federal government certainly does. But when it really comes down to it, the whole speed limit thing's a farce. It has been effectively nullified. So we take that kind of civil disobedience and we apply it at the state and local level. And really, when you get down to it, it actually does come down to individual action. I mean, marijuana legalization wouldn't have been successful if there weren't people that were already willing to say, you know what, we want to use this substance either for medical purposes or because I just like the way it feels. And those are the types of things where we find success. People have to be willing to step up and do the prohibited activity. So, in a state like Kentucky, I would think in a state like Tennessee, people aren't gonna cooperate with federal gun laws. So if they're not cooperating, and if the state and local police aren't allowed to cooperate, the ATF's going to be like the state trooper there on I-40 with traffic going by at 80 miles an hour and hassling one or two people along the way. And eventually the whole thing just falls apart. And that's the ultimate goal. Ultimately, we want the whole thing to fall apart. We want this federal power to completely devolve and go away. And I tell people all the time, and there's probably somebody right now yelling at their video, well, the state governments are awful too. Well, yeah, absolutely they are, but there are 50 of them in the first place. So, some are more awful than others, and you have a choice, whereas when the federal government imposes a regulation on you, you have no place else to go. And then, like I said, it's really demonstrable that we have more control over what's going on at the state level and at the local level as well. I can document cases where, 40 or 50 phone calls to a committee chair in a state legislature has bounced a bill out of committee that he was trying to hold up. You never see that go on in Congress. The only people having influence in Congress are lobbyists. You and I can have influence in our state legislatures.
Yeah, well, I definitely, look, I have no great love for the state government of Tennessee or any state government for that matter.
It's one of the worst, actually.
Yeah, but, but it's not the People's Republic of California. So, I guess we at least have that going for us. But
here's the thing, too, though. There are things that, honestly, California's better on than any place in the country. If you want to not have to deal with as much in terms of surveillance, or they have some of the best state asset forfeiture laws in the country in terms of not allowing police to steal your stuff without any due process. So every state has its pluses and minuses, and now, Michael Bolton. We're actually based in California. Michael Bolton always says, he stays out in California because he likes his tyranny warm. so there's that.
Well, Michael Bolton is just a jerk because I see on Facebook him posting all the selfies of these year-round summer breezes in the background and everything else.
Yeah, he's sitting on top of his building, working.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let me play devil's advocate here for a second because I've done my 13-year stint in public school prison like a lot of people have. So I would say, now, Mike, hold on a second, because I was told that Congress, Supreme Court, and President, that the federal government was the supreme law of the land. So everyone else who is pushing back against a federal edict, they're in the wrong, right? They are somehow in a morally inferior position because it doesn't matter what they think. If the federal court has ruled, then that is it. So not only are you going against what is lawful and just, you're going against the moral fiber of American being because you are pushing back against the supreme law of the land. What do you say to people that say, well, Mike, I wish I could make a change, but I'm sorry. That's the way it is. We've got this living document called the Constitution, and our wiser among us have decided that the federal government has grown, and what they say is law, and whether it's the Commerce Clause or Supremacy Clause or anything else, that there's no wiggle room there. What do you say to somebody that's their programming? That's where they come from. That's all they've ever heard.
Well, there's really two directions I can take this, and I could sit here and spend 20 or 30 minutes going through constitutional originalism, and I can pull out quotes from the ratification debates, and I can definitively prove that the federal government was never intended to be supreme, that the reading of the Supremacy Clause that you get today is a complete misreading, that the federal government is only supreme when it is doing things in pursuance of the Constitution, and that the Supreme Court was never intended to be the final and sole arbiter of what is constitutional. I can make that case, and probably in about 10 or 15 minutes, most of your audience is going to be bored and go to sleep, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to make a pitch for my book, because I am a diehard capitalist. You can see it back here over my shoulder, Our Last Hope. And I go through the philosophical, moral, and historical case for nullification, and I actually go through step by step all of these various issues. I go through the various clauses of the Constitution and explain how they were meant and understood at the time of ratification. And I can show you by going through all of those steps that this modern day interpretation of the living, breathing Constitution, federal supremacy is absolutely wrong. But as far as our work goes, I've really started avoiding doing that because most people aren't going to take 20 or 30 minutes for a history lesson, and a deprogramming from the malfeasance of their high school history teacher. And so I really focus on the pragmatics. I'm a pragmatic kind of guy. And as far as our activism goes, the interesting thing is that the Supreme Court, whether you agree that, I don't really, most of the time I don't listen to the Supreme Court, but there's one situation where the Supreme Court has actually gotten it right in terms of the founding intent on federalism. And there's this whole legal principle called the anti-commandeering doctrine. And it dates all the way back to 1842. And the anti-commandeering doctrine, in a nutshell, holds that the federal government cannot require states to utilize their personnel or resources to enforce a federal law or implement a federal program. So under the federal law, as it's been laid out for the past 175 years, the state can't arrest a federal agent or physically block that federal agent from enforcing a federal law. But they don't have any obligation at all to help the federal government enforce its laws. So, the thing that we have going on right now, and anybody that's out there listening that's kind of more of a conservative is about to get really mad at me, but this whole idea of a sanctuary city is perfectly legitimate under the legal doctrine that has been developed over 175 years. The federal government cannot force the state to enforce its laws. It doesn't have to, and this has been upheld in multiple Supreme Court cases. So this Madison's blueprint that I mentioned from Federalist 46, this refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union, is actually encoded into federal law. So I'm perfectly legal when I say that the state of California doesn't have to enforce immigration law, or that the state of Tennessee doesn't have to enforce a gun law, or that the state of Utah could turn off the water to the NSA facility in Bluffdale, Utah. There's no obligation for the states to help the federal government. The federal government can try to do it itself. I'm sorry about its luck that it can't, but the states don't have to help. So that's really the angle that we take. And it's interesting because when I first started with the TAC about 5 years ago, we really tried to, hammer on the constitutional principles. We tried to do that teaching, and I would try to sit with the reporter for 30 minutes and give him a constitutional lesson, and it was useless. We still got the federal supremacy, you're a racist. That was pretty much. Now that we've shifted to this anti-commandeering strategy, which is practically effective and legally sound, those issues have vanished. And the pushback now we get is actually on the issue. So we actually can have the debate about whether or not we should have gun control in a given state, or whether or not we should have a sanctuary city, or these various policies. And when it gets into the policy realm instead of this legal argument, then it becomes much more difficult for I'll give you an example. In the great state of Tennessee, a few years ago, there was a bill that was effectively going to nullify federal gun control. And there were a number of legislators there on the state Senate, Brian Kelsey being chief among them, who hid behind this supremacy clause and these constitutional arguments to basically kill this bill. They didn't even have to go on record about whether or not they supported gun control or not, or whether they were Second Amendment guys. They could hide behind, well, this isn't constitutional. We're holding to the law of the land, which was utter BS. They just didn't want to, interfere with the federal government's enforcement of gun control. And they can't do that anymore because we've won the legal argument.
I'm gonna rewind here a little bit and switch gears, because you had already mentioned civil asset forfeiture, which of course we're all huge fans of, and that had led me to an article that I read of yours just recently that was on the 10th Amendment Center website. Police opposition to asset forfeiture reform reveals it's all about the money. And I know that this is predominantly coming from the state of Minnesota, but this isn't unfortunately, this is not just for the state of Minnesota. This is nationwide, and of course we have another recurring segment that we're not going to be doing this week, but we have a recurring segment, Mike, called Jeff Sessions Sucks. Yep. I know you're really offended that we would speak so poorly of such a great man.
He sucks. But, actually, I hate that guy.
Yeah, so. He is. Yeah,
it's awful.
That's probably as far as we can go and keep our episode PG this week, because we've been a little rated R the last couple of weeks, getting a little too hot. But so talk to us a little bit more about civil asset forfeiture and how there's, I mean, for one, how just morally bankrupt the institution is and how it really flies. I would say, I'm going to preface any comment you make by just saying you've got a friend in me on this topic, because if I was going to make like a top 3 or 5 list of what issues we have in our country today that are most just grossly in the face of our founders and constitutional principles, civil asset forfeiture is probably right there at the top. So talk to us a little bit about this article and how all the evidence seems to point to it has nothing to do with principles or law and order. It has everything to do with money.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you get into this issue. And it's not just this issue, and it really goes actually to something much broader. We have a situation that has developed in this country where effectively the lines between state, local, and federal law enforcement have been completely erased. Basically, we have a national police force that is policing based on national priorities. And the civil asset forfeiture is a big part of this because we've got the whole war on drugs, which from a federal level is completely unconstitutional. And the federal government uses the goodies that are available through asset forfeiture, through police militarization, to effectively prioritize local policing. And so whenever you have any type of legislation that seeks to reform an asset forfeiture law, to do something as mundane, in my mind, as require a conviction before you can take somebody's stuff. I mean, I don't understand how anybody could possibly object to that. I mean, that's like fundamental in any legal system. You know, you're innocent until proven guilty, and then you're guilty, and then you can be punished. Well, asset forfeiture punishes you whether you're guilty or not. You know, it just assumes that, oh, this dude had some money, so therefore, and he's black, so he must be a drug dealer. You know, it's a horrible, horrible system. And every time you have these come up in the state legislature, and there's a strong movement right now across the country to reform these laws, in every single case, you're going to get opposition from police lobbies. It's not it's not the leftist, it's the police lobbies that are opposing these bills. And again, they're also opposing any efforts to rein in surveillance. They're opposing any efforts to stop enforcement of federal gun laws. Anything that has to do with limiting their ability to work with the federal government, the police departments are going to absolutely come down hard against it. They are very powerful lobbies. In some states, like Tennessee, I mean, they have almost total sway of what goes on in the legislature. Mm-hmm. So this article that I wrote is actually based on a committee hearing that was up in Minnesota. But the reason I did the article, the reason we put it on the main page was really because it is indicative. We hear the same arguments over and over again. And it's so funny listening to these guys because the first thing they'll get up there and, they got their little cop suits on and this is not about the money. We are trying to get these horrible criminals off the street. And then they immediately pivot into how we're not going to have the money to do this, and our budget needs this, and it's money this. And so I just basically, you can just kind of mark this down. If somebody tells you it's not about the money, it's absolutely about the money. And that's the reality with asset forfeiture. The police departments are using this to plug their budgets. And there was just one of these cops that testified. He actually went as far as to say, well, most asset forfeitures, we get a criminal conviction anyway. Well, then what are you worried about? No, it's not true. And that you're not going to be able to fill this budget hole. So when the Institute of Justice I think they're the ones that termed the phrase policing profit, absolutely accurate. And it's imperative that we get these laws reformed. And it's very important too, we're seeing reform at the state level. But all of these reforms have to include provisions to stop the state police from passing cases off to the federal government. Because here's what happens. You'll get a really good reform like they did in California that requires a conviction. There's robust protections for the person that's charged. It's basically like a normal criminal proceeding. What happens in these cases is the police say, okay, well, we're just going to let the federal government adopt this forfeiture. Then they can prosecute it under their rules, which are much looser, and then we get 80% of the money back. So this has to be stopped because anytime you have reform at the state level, police just circumvent it by passing cases off to the Fed. So a number of states, such as California, Colorado recently did this. several other states have actually closed this loophole and prohibited their state and local police from passing cases off to the feds unless it's over a certain very high amount of money to allow for the prosecution of like big criminal enterprises, which I think they ought to ban all of. But sometimes you got to take what you can get when it comes to legislative activity. But so yeah, that's asset forfeiture, and it really ties in with the whole drug war and surveillance, police militarization. All of these things kind of run together, and you've got the federal government basically dictating local policing priorities. And that's why you've seen the number of murders solved, the number of rapes solved, the number of property crimes solved. Those are dropping because police are focusing all their energy on the drug war, and they can pull money in from this asset forfeiture garbage.
It's funny. I wasn't. It's a serious subject. I wasn't laughing at that, but I laughed because you were talking about how, the idea that there should be, a trial and a process before people's possessions are stolen, and that's really what it is. It's being stolen, and that would seem like such a basic core right that it's hard to believe anyone that there would be any pushback from that, and yet there is. It just reminded me we're actually going to be talking to the great Scott Horton next week, and I know that's going to be a barn burner, and I had laughed at a tweet he sent last night because someone had tweeted out one of the better congressmen, and that's really saying something, had tweeted something along the lines of such and such is unconstitutional, and Scott's reply was, "Oh, how quaint." Isn't that sweet that's what you're going to hide behind on this particular issue, as if that's ever mattered for anything else that's going on in Washington. So,
and that's what's really frustrating from my perspective. The Constitution is basically window dressing for politicians who want to push forward a particular agenda. And the perfect example of how this works is the fact that, when Obama was in office, we had all of these states like Tennessee and Arizona and these red states really wanting to push back against the feds. We're going to get to Obama and we're not going to let him. And these executive orders, and this is awful. Mm-hmm. And now that Trump's president, all those people have shut up. They want us to shut up. They want the federal government to do what the federal government does now that they're in control of the mechanism. And now all of a sudden we've got friends on the left. All of a sudden, oh well, maybe Mike, you weren't a racist. Maybe this isn't a bad idea now. It's so frustrating. And I know that as soon as the next election cycle comes along and the power dynamics flip, it's going to go back, and all of a sudden the Tea Partiers will be back, and they'll all be waving their constitutions around again. And, that's the one thing that we really try to do at the 10th Amendment Center. We are staying true to this principle. The federal government is only supposed to do a very limited number of things, and we don't want it to do any more than those limited number of things, and we don't care who's in power. So.
Well, I think what you're hitting on is everyone has heard that cliche of the anti-war left, and you hear people say the time that the anti-war left disappears when there's a Democrat in office running the drone strikes, but they'll be back, when a Republican gets back in. So I think we're going to have to add to that because I'm no big fan of a left-right paradigm at all. So I think if we're going to call out the anti-war left, we have to call out the small government right. The small government right was up in arms 4 years ago, but where are they today?
Yeah. But isn't it weird that this is probably a bunny trail from our discussion, but isn't it weird that the anti-left really hasn't come back? Like, I think the left still wants to have a war with Russia because they're convinced that Trump is Russian or something. It's really weird and creepy.
Well, I think what it is the fact that there's that cognitive dissonance there where people know that now you've had Republican and Democrat administrations all over foreign intervention. And just like you've had Democrat and Republican administrations all over increasing our debt and exploding budget deficits and so on. So at this point, now that everybody's covered up in everybody else's proverbial mud, so to speak, there's no escaping it anymore. So now at this point, you might as well just duke it out to see who can outdo the other in, who can have a more outlandish budget, who can fund more boondoggles, and who can have more interventions. Because at this point, everybody, there's no separation separation. I mean, of course, people in our camp, we would say there never was any separation. It's not like this is not some sort of magical modern phenomenon. This has been going on for some time.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because we were making this case, during the midterm elections when you had Obama and Romney. I made this case to people, and I actually tried to get some people to bet me. I said, no matter which of these people wins, a year later, the federal government will be deeper in debt. It will have expanded and taken on more powers, and you will have lost more of your liberty. Doesn't matter which one of these guys. I mean, there's basically that much space between your mainstream Republican and your mainstream Democrat. And you see that in the way that the Republicans are governing. I mean, what did they swear to us was going to happen? As soon day one, when we get control, we're going to repeal Obamacare. Well, we're 430 some days in, and we still have Obamacare. And we're always going to have Obamacare, because they don't really care about rolling back the federal government. They only care about expanding their own power. And that's why I say often, don't call the 202 area code, with a very few glaring exceptions. They're all useless. They're all pushing for unconstitutional things. They're all pushing for expanded power. And what we need to do, if we really care about liberty, if we really care about, even if you're not a libertarian and you're just a person that believes in this whole concept of the American limited constitutional government, you should ignore D.C. and start working at the state and local level, because that's the only way you're ever going to rein this in. We could repeal Obamacare simply by having the states not implement it. But nobody wants to do that. They want to focus on electing the next great congressman or electing the next great president, and that person doesn't exist. It's like Tom Woods says with foreign policy: no matter who you vote for, you get John McCain. And we're certainly seeing that now.
Mike, I'm never going to have you on the show again, because you're stealing my thunder. See, this, Blake, take notes of this. I swear to you, I'm not joking. Earlier in the show, I said we're going to hit civil asset forfeiture, and then you bring up civil asset forfeiture before I can get to it. And then I say, I've got the link up for Our Last Hope, Mike's book. And then he's like, hey, check out my book. And then I say, as soon as he gets done talking, I'm going to make a quip about John McCain. And I'll be danged if Mike doesn't hit us with Wood's Law. You always wind up with John McCain. So I'm gonna excuse myself for the rest of the show, and you just finish it.
Me to go ahead and host.
Yeah. So no, I mean, that's great. I wanna because I think we talked before the show. We're both cynical guys, so we're gonna have to try to have a little bit cheerier news before we're done here. So I wanna take one more swipe at the 10th Amendment Center before we move on to the Mike Maharrey extravaganza. Is there any just really exciting or juicy nullification news going on nationwide right now that is really worth mentioning today? And I'll give you bonus points if you have any good news for us down here in the South.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I think there's a lot of really positive things that are moving forward in a whole multitude of different issues. For instance, I just wrote a bill report the other day. There's a couple of bills moving through the Louisiana state legislature that will expand their medical marijuana law to cover a couple of more conditions. And this is an interesting thing. A lot of times libertarians, when it comes to legislative stuff, when you talk about medical marijuana or legalizing hemp or those type of things, they get really frustrated because the bills don't go far enough, or it creates dysregulation, and we're not going to be for that because it's just creating more state. But here's the thing that often happens: you get your foot in the door, and then it expands. I'll give you another example. Last year, the state of West Virginia passed a bill to expand their hemp law. So they had this hemp law on the books, and basically they were running this federally compliant hemp program, research only. And they realized, we can't create a hemp industry doing research only and trying to follow these federal guidelines. So last year, they passed the law and basically said, you know what? We're going to let anybody who wants to in this state grow hemp. And so this happens a lot. So you had this law passed in medical marijuana in Louisiana, of all places. And initially, it was a pretty limited law, limited conditions. It took them a while to even get it implemented. And now all of a sudden, you're starting to see this stuff expand. So I think that's a real positive. On the medical front, we've had, I think we're up to maybe 30 plus states that have passed two laws that I think are very positive on the healthcare front. One is what's called direct primary care. And I think they have it in Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken. I know they just passed it this year in Florida. They passed it last year in Kentucky. And basically, direct primary care allows me as a patient to pay a flat fee on a monthly basis to a direct primary care physician. And that allows me to access all of my, normal primary care stuff. Anything that happens in a doctor's office is covered by that flat fee. I actually have a direct primary care physician. It's $75 a month. The other couple weeks ago, I had a sinus infection, called him up. 4 hours later, I was sitting in the office getting my antibiotic. On top of that, the cost of my medication going through my doctor dropped from $56 a month to $8 a month. So incredible cost savings. And what these laws do is pretty simple. It basically just exempts direct primary care from insurance regulations. So it frees them up. It allows them to kind of do their own business with limited regulation from the state. And it's an option that people can take outside of the traditional insurance Obamacare system. Another bill that's similar to this is Right to Try, which allows people in states that have passed it to try medications and treatments that are not FDA approved if they have a terminal illness. This is another no-brainer. Somebody's dying of cancer, and you're going to say, oh, I'm sorry, we have this promising treatment, but the FDA hasn't approved it yet, so you can't have it. So states are basically just bypassing the FDA and saying, you know what, we're going to allow doctors in our state to prescribe with their patients these types of medications. These are great bills.
Yeah.
The Right to Try now, I think, is in place in 38 states maybe. So almost the entire country has adopted this. We continue to see marijuana legalization expanding. We're seeing hemp expanding. We're seeing a number of states starting to push back against the surveillance state by passing laws to limit stingray spying, drone spying. A number of states have, and I think there's actually a bill that's in the process of moving through the Tennessee legislature right now to exempt gold and silver from sales taxes, which is just a small steps forward for people being able to use sound money. So the interesting thing to me is over the last 3 years, so when I started with TAC, I've been with the 10th Amendment Center for 6 years. The first couple of years, I could tell you every bill in every state that was moving forward that had anything to do with pushing back against federal power. Over the last 3 years, we've seen more than 500 bills introduced across the country in all of those 3 years. So basically 1,500 bills over the last 3. I can't keep up with them anymore.
Wow.
And we're seeing more and more of these bills pass. Granted, they're small steps, but they're building blocks and they're building momentum and they're teaching people that, hey, we don't have to do everything that the federal government says. We've got this legal structure that allows us to just say no. So, hey, let's do it. And so we're working to expand that to more issues and into more states, and we're going to keep doing it. So I'm really optimistic. I think this is, my book is a path to liberty. I really do think this is a path to liberty because it decentralizes and it teaches people that we don't have to bow down in subservience to Washington, D.C. And anytime you're teaching people not to bow down to the almighty political authorities, I think that's a plus.
Yeah.
Can you believe the audacity of Mike trying to engage in market activity with his private doctor without Uncle Sam's permission? How dare you?
That's a shame.
We could do an entire show about how awesome direct primary care is. I mean, I've been blown away by it.
That's the first I've ever heard of that. That's fabulous.
Yeah. Well,
it really is.
I mean, I'm so happy that you're here to tell us about some nullification news, and I'm so happy to hear that there's so much going on that you can't keep up with it because it's not just the principle of the matter that there is pushback and we're trying to accomplish good things. It's just the fact that you can actually point your finger and say, I can identify a resistance at all. That there even is a representation.
Yeah.
So here's what I encourage people to do that are watching. Head over to blog.10thamendmentcenter.com and just look. I mean, we're posting articles every day as bills pass. Every time a bill passes through a committee or passes a House, gets signed into law, we're putting that stuff on the blog. You can just scroll there and see, this state's passed this bill. This committee has passed this bill. This is moving forward in this state. Click on a couple of those and read about how the process works, and you really start to get a sense of the strategy that we're doing and how potentially effective it is. And spend 10 or 15 minutes perusing that, and then go to our members section and sign up for a membership. Seriously, we have memberships for like $2 a month, and a whole bunch of people giving us $2 a month help us to continue doing our work. So another shameless plug there.
Now, well, as you were talking, I had the browser pulled up to blog.10thamendmentcenter.com, but unfortunately, I wasn't there. I was on some other subpage called /author/Michael Maharrey, so I got some nonsense on my screen here. But
that guy's a loser.
Yeah, no, right? So I want to switch gears real quick because we're already coming up on an hour because you've done the whole show for me, which is why we have guests.
Yes,
because I've run out of things to say. So I'm looking at michaelmaharrey.com and right here front and center there's your blog, biography, your books, Constitution 101, podcasts, and right here front and center your free ebook, The Power of No, and it's the historical and constitutional for state nullification. And I can't read the text because it's so small. I'm actually pulling it up here. I had it on another link. There it is. The Power of No. That's a free ebook by Michael Maharrey.
It will cost you your email.
It'll cost you your email. So you can go to michaelmaharrey.com, The Power of No, Historical and Constitutional Basis for State Nullification to Limit Federal Power and Its Practical Application. All you got to do is sign in with your name and email and you get that free ebook. He's talking about an overview of the principles of nullification as laid out in Thomas Jefferson and James Madison's Kentucky and Virginia resolutions of 1798. That's for those listening at home. That's that one thing that your teacher said one time in your junior year. You had never heard it before.
Probably not even that.
Probably not, and you never heard it since. Yep. But that's what it's all about. And I also wanted to touch. I had a link here for your book, but you ruined it for me because it's back there on your bookshelf. Our Last Hope: Rediscovering the Lost Path to Liberty. Now I've got the link here from the shop at the 10th Amendment Center. Is that where you direct people to find it?
You can go wherever you want to find it. You can get it there through the 10th Amendment Center. You can also get it on Amazon.com. There's an audio version, a Kindle version. So wherever people prefer to do their shopping, go do it there. Just do it.
So, Our Last Hope: Rediscovering the Lost Path to Liberty. Michael Maharrey explores the moral, philosophical, and historical case for nullification. So we're not just pulling this out of our butts here, people.
No.
Places it in a 21st century context and shows why it truly does represent the last hope for liberty in America. That's heavy right there.
Yeah.
The last hope for liberty in America.
It's a little audacious, but it's really designed, like I said, it's for people who are engaged in the political system, that believe in the American political system, and like I said, if this is the system that we're supposed to have, then let's do it like it's supposed to be done. And the way it's being done now, obviously, has no resemblance whatsoever to the Constitution as ratified. So. Pick up the book. The Power of No will kind of whet your appetite, and then Our Last Hope actually goes deeper into all of these principles and a lot of founding era source documents that I've used in both of these. So it's not me talking; it's really more Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, all of these people. It's what they said. I'm not making this stuff up. It's their own words. So. I think people, even if you're not, even if you're like a hardcore anarchist, I think it's good education, for people that are interested in history and want to know, what they weren't taught. It's I think a great resource.
Now I'm gonna drag you along with us before I let you go, because we've done nothing but talk about 10th Amendment Center. We're gonna do one of our recurring segments it's the meme of the week, because Mike, I don't know if you know this or not, but I think everybody at least south of like the age 35 just gets all of their information from meme form now. They don't actually do any.
Yes.
They don't read anything
Absolutely.
anymore. And so our meme of the week, and I know you can't see it, but I'll describe it to you. Our meme of the week is the who would win meme. Who would win? The mayor of London or one buttery boy? And of course, that's in reference to
butter knife.
That's in reference to London's current war on knives, because I guess the war on guns was already won, and even though I think crime is skyrocketing, and now they're to the war on knives. And I go ahead.
I was going to say, I posted this on my own Facebook page yesterday, I think. This was an honest-to-God tweet from a police department in a suburb of London. And they had laid out on the ground, they had a pair of pliers, a pair of scissors, like a screwdriver, some kind of file-looking thing, and then kind of a knife. And this, honest to goodness, they were saying, we got these dangerous weapons off the street. And when I first saw that, somebody else had shared it. When I first saw it, I'm like, this can't be real. And I actually went to that police department's Twitter page, and it is as real as can be. And so I posted this picture and I captioned it. Meanwhile, some poor guy that was working on fixing his radiator hose, he went inside to get a beer, and now he's wondering where his tools went. I mean, that's how absurd this is.
Well, it's the only reason I even used that as our meme of the week for this week is that this is a perfect week to bring that up. That we're trying to invoke principles and philosophies of our founding fathers so that we don't wind up where Britain is today.
Right.
And we've actually talked a little bit about England the last couple of weeks just because, for better or worse, and trust me, there's plenty of worse, but for better or worse, I mean, the empire of Great Britain was like the leading force of Western civilization for centuries. Yep. And yet here we are today scrounging up screwdrivers and arresting elderly men who defend themselves in home invasions a little too roughly. It just, it's I mean, you're right. It's like you expect this to be an article on The Onion, and it's not. This is legit news, and everyone's very solemnly faced when they're reporting on this, and they have leading representation in mayor and parliament saying, well, we've got to get these pliers off the street, and you see the signs. You've seen the signs of all the little drop-off places, and they have only cowards carry knives and things like that. And that's the kind of grade school tripe that you hear from, just the most bootlicking statist you can possibly find. It's caricature stuff for us, right? When you and I are making up cartoon characters that represent our opposition, which is totally a straw man because you think surely they've got a higher IQ position than that. Now, this is what these people actually say on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, they're going to ask everybody to walk down the street whenever they go outside with their hands in their pockets so that you don't threaten people to get punched.
Yeah, well, I don't know where the birthplace of microaggressions is, but we're at a serious risk of, it's all the more reason why we have to be vigilant on natural rights and the basic rights that we feel are inherent in all human beings that are as a result of their very humanity, because it seems silly to talk about. But it's in other places in the world, it's not a silly subject, and things that we would have thought were silly a decade ago are all of a sudden very real cultural fights for us today. So I want to give you one more chance real quick before we sign off. 10thamendmentcenter.com. So what are the best things for people to do to support you and the 10th Amendment Center?
Well, the first thing that I think is really important is, like I said, go over to that blog and find anything that's going on in your own state. And if you go to the end of any of those bill reports, you'll find what's next. And it'll tell you, whether it's going to be in the House or the Senate or another committee. And take a minute and make a phone call to your state representative or your state senator and say, hey, I want you to support this bill. Or, if it's at the governor's desk, call the governor's office, say, hey, I want you to sign this bill into law. This is where the work gets done. And I tell this story a lot because it kind of blows my mind. But I was talking to a state rep, and this has been a number of years ago, but state rep here in Kentucky. And he told me that he has gone through entire legislative sessions without ever hearing from a constituent on a bill. Mm-hmm. That blew my mind. So when you think about that a minute, if these guys are nobody's paying attention to what they're doing, if all of a sudden they get 40 or 50 phone calls in support of a piece of legislation, that's going to have some significant impact. And like I said, I've literally seen bills that were being held up by a stubborn committee chair all of a sudden get a hearing when they get 20 or 30 phone calls and 60 emails. And so your phone call can make a difference. So find out what's going on in your state and take that 5 or 10 minutes to engage your state representative and your state senator and your governor's office. That's how the work gets done. That's where the pressure comes. It's all about what's going on at the grassroots. I can tell you from years of experience that in states where there are strong grassroots movements, people are engaged in the process, stuff gets done. In states where everybody's kind of like, oh, yeah, and nothing gets done. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if you're interested in what we're doing, if you want to support us financially, we would love to have you as a member. Like I said, we have memberships as low as like $2 a month. And that might not sound like much on your end, but we've got a lot of people who do these $2 a month memberships, and that helps us pay the bill. You know, we're not the Heritage Foundation. We're not Cato. We don't have a $24 million budget. You know, I'm sitting in my office right now, which is AKA my spare bedroom. You know, our headquarters is in Michael Bolden's apartment. You know, we have a less than 6-figure a year budget. So any support that can be given is appreciated. It helps us pay the bills, pay our web hosting, and do all that stuff, and continue with the activism. And then we're also always looking for volunteers if people want to submit articles or you know, work in your own state, organize grassroots efforts and coordinate things. We have a volunteer form you can fill out, and we'll get you plugged in and put you to work for sure.
So, recapping for everybody, you can find the 10th blog at blog.10thamendmentcenter.com. Go to the 10thamendmentcenter.com and subscribe, donate, become a member. If you want to find Mike and his bajillion articles and books and podcasts and everything else, that is michaelmaharrey.com. Michael, I can't thank you enough for being here for us. We really want you to come back or talk to us on a regular basis so you can tell us where we're winning and where we need to improve.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to. And we can, you know, we talk about some people will probably be interested in hearing my, I'll give the brief overview. I've gotten involved in efforts here in my local community relating to surveillance, and did a couple of open records requests and ended up getting sued by the city. So I've got an ongoing lawsuit because I had the audacity to ask, hey, what are these cameras? So that's always interesting. So that, you know, that's an episode in and of itself. So
how dare you question the Politburo, citizen? What is wrong with you?
Yeah, well, they're going to lose. That's the funny thing.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Well, you know, I was going to say that maybe us in Tennessee and Kentucky can just figure out how we want to live and secede, but then they'll call us racist and neo-Confederates and every other name in the book. But I'm so...
I've already been called all that. I don't even care anymore.
Okay, well, there you go. Well, then fine. You just wear it like armor.
I married a black woman, so you can call me a racist all you want. You look like an idiot.
and in Kentucky, no less. So this is the new South. Well, Mike, I'm so happy you were here to talk with us. It's been such a pleasure. We're big fans of the 10th Amendment Center. You know, like I said right on the onset, I don't make a lot of constitutional arguments, but I'm a big fan of you guys, and I definitely have a sympathetic position for people to remember that it's not just about voting every 4 years for that one demagogue who's going to lead the country. You know, get to know your local representatives, get to know your state representatives, and you know, it's something that I know Tom Woods has said before too, that if we totally withdraw from the process completely, then that just guarantees that we are not going to be heard.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here.
Sir.
You got anything else, Mike?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just, for me, what I got from that is amazing is that we, at this grassroots level, do still have access. Do you know what I mean? I think a lot of people get the thought that, hey, the federal government just runs everything and we have absolutely no voice, so why talk? And I think that, you know, why speak up? And I think that a lot of people who, you know, are just the average Joe like myself really, you know, that's why they don't get involved, because they think it's a waste of their time. They think, I can scream all I want, but no one's going to listen to me. But 40 phone calls, 30 phone calls to a local representative can wag the dog, which is pretty cool. That's encouraging.
Cool. Yeah.
That's good.
You can't stop fighting.
No.
You can't stop fighting, and that's what the 10th Amendment Center is all about.
And you got to keep fighting.
Yeah. So MikeMaharrey.com or MichaelMaharrey.com. Mike, thanks again so much for talking to us. I can't thank you enough. You've been such a great guest, even though you stole all my thunder and took all my topics and I had nothing left to talk about. So thank you so much for being here.
It was fun. I appreciate you guys having me.
Thank you. I want to remind people before we sign off, subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can find if you just search the Gold Standard Podcast or the Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. You can follow us on Facebook, which is facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. Follow me on Twitter if you want to hear me and Mike and all of our cynicism. That is at Alan M. Mosley. And then our website, which is really the most important thing. And we go over this I don't know why I list everything when we have a website. You got to go to thegoldstandardpodcast.com.
All right.
Good.
That's it. Sir, I think we got another one in the bag.
All right, guys. Join us next week. We appreciate it.